The Next Monday Rule: How to Capture and Implement New Ideas in Your Business. In this episode, John Tonkin from Brain in a Box discusses the concept of the Next Monday Rule and how it can impact your business. You'll learn about the importance of capturing and implementing new ideas, including strategies for writing them down, assessing their value, and integrating them into existing systems and processes. Perfect for the entrepreneurs looking to improve their productivity and build better systems. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl, and this is the Systems from the Box podcast. Let's start unpacking. John, I wanted to talk to you about something that you mentioned to me as we were planning for the show. And it's had me intrigued ever since as to where this is going to take us. So I'm going to ask you the leading question. Talk to me about the Next Monday Rule.
The Next Monday Rule. We work with a client, and here it is, it's Monday this week, and Tuesday comes along, and we're working there, and something happens, and we're working on a process sometime, and someone says, okay, all right, we're working on this, and we say, look, we've got this checklist. Just what are we going to call it? Oh, let's call it the invoice checklist, just for want of something better. And so we think, all right, let's do the invoice checklist. And then we get to next Monday, and I've left the business by now, and we're there next Monday, and the team is looking at it and saying, what's this invoice checklist? I've never seen one of them. We don't need that, do we? No, look, let's just get rid of it. I don't know what it is, and so on. So they have no memory or no useful memory of having discussed it when we were there, because it's now next Monday. So many things have happened when we work together or when we're now getting on with life that it's hard to think of that. So what we want to do is avoid the Next Monday Rule hurting us by, when we have a good idea, put it down straight away. So when we were there last Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was, when we decided that we should have an invoice checklist, what we should have done was to pick up a blank checklist and straight away put down on there invoice checklist at the top. And then we put down 5 or 6 things that would have been on that. Check the entity, confirm the entity address for the payee address or the payer address, confirm the tax treatment, confirm this right now, check this, do that. These are all the things we have to check for an invoice. And if we wrote down the top 4 or 5 things next week, when we get there and say, what's this invoice checklist? We don't have one of them. We don't need that. I don't know. Wait a sec. Let's just look at the quick draft one we did last week. All right. Wait a sec. This is the one where we've got the checklist. These are the things we have to check for the invoice. When we check the entity and the address for the entity and so on, they're the things there. Oh, that's right. I remember that now. And now we flesh it out and we end up capturing that idea. So every time we work with a client, and I'd recommend anyone listening to this, if you're working on systems, have some blank checklist sheets there, just items on a list, a little tick box next to it, and a title at the top. That's all you need. And so that when you come up with an idea, you can start it there, and this will trigger you working on it next week. So the Next Monday Rule simply says, everything makes sense when we're talking about it here and now, but next week I don't have the same context. Will I remember what it is? So I should put something in place, write it down, put it on a board, record a little note on your phone or something like that, so that next week when you come there and you're saying, what's this, etc., don't get hit by the Next Monday Rule. You just go, oh, wait a sec, I've got a note on the wall there. Oh, that's right, that's what it is. So want to avoid that.
It's such an important, simple idea, though, in business, because how often do we do something and we might be, for example, out with a client and they ask a question, oh, gee, we really should have that. And you're thinking in your mind, okay, have that. Or you may have even adapted a template on the run. And then what happens is that template is not really a template. It's actually in that specific instance that you've used. And it might be the nature of your business might be there's some gap between the next time that you may go to use that particular template, and then it gets lost. So it is so important to have that system in place for being able to edit the system.
That's right. Editing systems is everything, because nothing will stay the same. If I were to look at any process that I did, 5 years ago, I can guarantee that it will be out of date to the point where if you followed it, might be dangerous. So we've got to have that. We're thinking of the next Monday rule. We want to go that bit further on and sort of allow for things to change that we don't even think about, and so on. So we've got to be able to be ready for that change and make changes all the way along, certainly.
I think one of the things that you need to think about as well for a business is that technology is changing all the time. So we can talk about, yes, we're out with a client and they've asked us about this, and that's a great idea. We should add that onto the template. But often it's more complex than that, right? It's today there's a new piece of software that someone has become aware of. And being able to look at that and go, well, we've always done things this way, but how do we test the technology? How do we actually work out, is there a value in this?
Yeah. So if you think about it, you got new tools, new people, new technology, new legislation, new codes of practice, new everything you can think of, it can be renewed and so on. And our goal is to make it so that we keep up, as long as keeping up it doesn't become the target itself. Our target is delivering what our clients want to buy at the price they're prepared to pay, allowing us to make a profit. That's what business is. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we are keeping up with the current world out there, to make sure that we're looking at new technology, new software, new everything else that we just mentioned, but we're doing it in a sensible way that says, good, I found something which is a candidate. We've got to recruit them in effect. We've got to interview them. We've got to check their credentials. We've got to go through and make sure that they pass the test. Will they fit into our business, in terms of integration with others, technology or software or whatever it is? But they have to, in effect, pass the recruitment test to come in. So I always recommend, think of everything new you do in business, you bring into your business, as having to go through that recruitment process. Would I recruit this piece of software after I've gone through all the tests? Would it be a good candidate to replace this bit of software, which has worked well for however long?
Yeah, and I think it is important, isn't it, to have again, we talk about systems because most people are thinking about systems in terms of the business process and what you do, but also there's a system that needs to be in place for how do you actually measure, whether it's a new human being or whether it's a tech piece of technology that you're bringing into the business, on whether this is the right move for your business, because change is always difficult and it's easy to go for the bright shiny new thing, and we're all guilty of doing that at one time or another. But it is kind of measuring it. I know there are various markets where apps exist and you can usually buy them for very low amounts, lifetime deals and things that exist. I know of one person who revealed to me recently that I think it was 250 or 300 of these that he's bought over the last couple of years. And I'm like, that's just crazy. The dollar amount is not that
Mm.
significant. It is significant enough, but it's not ridiculous. But it's like, what's the point of all of that stuff? Like, how can you can't possibly utilize and integrate all that. You can't even test all of those things properly.
Yeah. I mean, a big factor has to be the disruption factor. I mean, there's no point in bringing something that is going to disrupt the business to the point where, oh, John's brought in this new tool. Oh, honestly, I don't see how it'll fit. If we do that, it means this one here has to go because it's no good anymore. And all the changes, we're always going to have to think about, how will this impact? And again, I come back to that recruitment idea. Every bit of new technology we bring in, everything that we bring in that will disrupt what we're doing, it may be a good disruption, it may be a bad one, but we should be going through and assessing that carefully, in effect, interviewing that change to see if it's worthwhile, employing it. Because there's no point in doing something just because it's a shiny new thing. That guy who's got 200 new bits of software, I wonder how many of them are still being or I wonder how many of them were ever used. And if any of them were, how many are still being used of those ones which we thought? Because so many things that we look at and we think, oh, that's fantastic. And it's so much prettier or better than the one we've got. But then there are other features in the old one that may be worthwhile keeping and so on. It really comes down to think about everything and ask that question that we've all read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Think of that question that Keith Cunningham asked, which is, what don't I see? And I think it's so critical to look at that. We're looking at the change and we're thinking, okay, it looks good. The critical question is, what don't I see? because I can see these things, but what don't I see? And so on. So it really comes down to that sort of question.
And again, I think the interesting part, and this is a question that works whether it's a human being or whether it's a piece of technology, you can see it's one thing to see new pieces that you can bring in, but it's also the promise of people or technology that's always there that going, yes, I'm going to get to that to be able to do that, or we're going to introduce that new feature into the software. What's really hard is where do you draw the line in the sand and say enough is enough, we actually need to move, versus giving the, whether it's
Yeah.
again the technology company that you're subscribing to a kick up the backside or literally the person that's working there to do the same, because that is an important idea to understand when the business needs to be ready for change
Yeah.
versus when you're being held up. Hey, John, I just want to take a break from the main part of the podcast for a moment so you can tell us a little bit more about Brain in a Box.
So Brain in a Box the idea started when I was working in corporate. I was working in a couple of major companies, internationals, and I decided that when I went out and started my first business in 2000, that it was going to use the same principles as I had done in corporate world to capture systems and to make them accessible to the team. But I thought I've got to be able to do this for small business, small to medium business, and that's what we focus on. So we work with the business owner, with the team, to capture what the business does, and then to minimize the risk by going through and looking at all the risks that we have to manage, make sure we capture those and manage them effectively, and also to achieve the benefit. And then we make all that. That's just effectively what it is. As a matter of fact, when we finish this, I will be starting to work on a little project for a client. And we're working on that project because the software he uses to track people, I'll just say that, doesn't offer the service. He wants to be able to print next week's timetable for each of the people he's talking about. And the software, which has all the timetables in it, doesn't allow him to print out or email all the timetables to different people, the people relevant. And so we're looking at how we'll do that, and we'll use a bit of AI or something to try and find the best way of doing it. But it is where we're saying, I've got something we need to do. The software doesn't let us. And so it's either do we now change that software, or do we look at an add-on, which is what we're looking at doing, which we'll create and customize for them. But we're looking at doing something like that to make it do what it should have done in the first place. So in the conversation yesterday, the guy said, the client I'm talking to, he's said, I'm going to talk to the software people because this should be a feature in the software. And very often it is just something no one's thought of it yet, so they haven't put it there. And often you will make changes to the software based on the feedback you get from your users. So if he makes that suggestion, it's possible they will say, yep, we can do that. And I know particularly in the software we use, Lucid Chart, there are changes in there. I was a trusted tester back in 2013, and there are changes in there which I can still point to, which came from things I influenced back at the time then. And it's the same with every bit of software. We'll try and fix it, but if we can't, we may have to do something else. But it is that conscious assessment. Is this the best thing to do? What's the best way
Yeah, and I
forward
think
from
on
here?
that note, just
Yeah.
I suppose a little bit of a side note is that it can also endear you to those technology companies if you do offer them the insights, because they actually do, generally speaking, welcome the feedback. Some have, dedicated areas where they're taking interests and they sort of more or less take a poll. If enough people are saying that they want this, they'll jump in. But that's not always the case. And lots of times you're using bits of technology in your business where you can offer that input and they will, rub their hands and go, wow, this could be a simple thing that they could do, could open up a whole new market for people who have never bothered to ask for it, but are actively looking for it.
Yep, that's the truth. Another point to look at in there as well is that most people use one third to two thirds of the capability of the software they own. So you'll see that nearly everyone has a CRM. And oh, right. And do you do emailing from your CRM? Oh, we do a little bit, but we do that in here. And do you do this in your CRM? Oh, we do that, but we don't. We can, but we don't. And so on. It's almost every bit of software, no matter what it is, whether it's a CRM or otherwise, we use the components that we first looked at it for. We use the components that we find easy and attractive. but we don't use all the other things. So the first thing I will always say when we're talking about potentially looking at a new software solution is to say, does your existing software do this? And if it does it do it as well enough for you to use? And if the answer is, I don't know, well, you should explore that because you should use every bit of software to the death. You know, if you've got 10 features, you should be trying to use all 10 or all those ones which apply to your business. Because otherwise, everything you add on, remember, you're buying a new piece of software and you're only going to use that one bit of that you like. So which means that 90% of what you're buying is not going to be used. Doesn't sound very good. So yeah, there's so much around using technology that we've really got to think about carefully so that we actually get the benefit of everything we have. If we're looking at our tech stack, we're looking at integrations between them as much as we are individual capabilities of those, because we want to have that, as little as possible manual work between bits of
And
software.
I think we talk about the idea of looking at new pieces of software, but then there's also the idea of a system for transitioning, isn't there? Because once you make that decision, how do you transition from one to another? I know I've experienced it in my business where we've had a particular project management tool and we've had two running simultaneously for a period of time, and we're just trying to, there's a few old projects that you kind of don't really want to take and pick up and put on a new system because there's too much effort involved in moving it versus let's just start the newer ones in there. So
Mm.
it's how you actually set up those rules for engagement and transitioning people, teaching them how to use it and over what period of time. All of those things, you need a system for that.
Yeah. And I remember going back to 2001, 2002, where I was working on a software development lifecycle, so a methodology for developing software. And one of the very first questions in that was, have you assessed the buy versus build argument? So anytime you're looking at software, it's either going to be buy software that you can use and potentially modify it a bit, or build software that you can use and potentially suffer from not having bought the other one. But it's a matter of making sure that we end up with what we were aiming for at the beginning. So it's really clear to have all of that very clearly stated. This is the scope we have to have covered by this software. It has to be able to do this. It should be able to do that. It'd be nice if it could do this. And we're going through and looking at our features and making sure that we capture everything we can, but making sure that we're not going to end up with something where if we build it, we build something that's so narrow that it's going to be very difficult to modify or very difficult to integrate with other software. So that's one thing we're always very careful if we're building a custom prop for a client. How can we make this integrate more closely with what you actually do and any other software you
So
have?
let's just wrap this up a little bit. I want to go back to the initial idea of the Monday rule because we've kind of transitioned from a whole lot of things of going in, looking at technology and people and bringing them in and looking at their new ideas, looking at how you then transition all of that into there. Tell me how we bring that all back to the Monday rule.
So my recommendation is with everything we see or hear in this case, that we hear something, we think that's a good idea. Straight away, don't think I'll write that down. We all have a telephone. Every telephone has a little voice record thing, and you can just voice record it straight away or put a little note in there, dictate a note into your phone or into a tablet or whatever else. Capture it in some way, because there are going to be little gems in almost everything we hear from most
From this
podcasts we
podcast in
hear,
particular,
and we
John,
should be.
hopefully everyone's taking lots of notes right now. It better be.
They cannot be, because I'm watching. Yeah, I wish I was watching, but no. Very simply, put the idea down, get it down there, because the last thing you want to be doing is, and I think we've all done this somewhere along the line, is to say, "Oh, yeah, I saw this podcast the other day, or saw this thing on YouTube the other day. It was really fantastic, and they showed how to do this, but I can't remember what they did. I can't remember the name of it, and I've looked for it and can't find it." All those horrible things that happen. So please, as you're listening to this, make sure you're jotting something down. If it's a time reference on the podcast, put a little number there or something like that. just do something that'll mean that you learn from it as you go. It's the same with everything anywhere in business. If we see something that's interesting, we should react in some way straight away. React might be thank someone. It might, for doing something good. It may be write it down straight away. It might be correct that thing that's wrong straight away. It could be anything like that, but we want to have that instant react when we see something.
Before you go, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're tuned to. Thank you for listening to the Systems from the Box podcast featuring John Tonkin from Brain in a Box. Details on how to contact John and his team are in the show notes, along with other valuable links you don't want to miss. This podcast is produced by Podcast Done For You. I'm Anthony Pearl. We look forward to your company on the next episode.